Outside Nigeria, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned that if Russia or Ukraine makes peace talks difficult, he may withdraw from the negotiations. Trump said he was hopeful a ceasefire could be reached, but made it clear that if either side proves too difficult, the U.S. would simply take a pass. His comments came just hours after Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking in Paris, said the administration was reassessing the viability of continued peace talks. We need to determine very quickly, in a matter of days, whether this is doable in the next few weeks. If it is not, then we have other priorities to focus on, end quote. Joining me to discuss this development is an international journalist, Thamsanqa Zhou. Thanks for coming. How do you think Russia and Ukraine might respond to President Trump's warning, and what strategies might they employ to avoid being seen as making talks difficult?
Well, happy Easter and Good Friday to your viewers, Felicity, and thank you so much for having me. Well, I think it is part of negotiation. It's one thing that is expected. The Americans are talking tough. Secretary of State Marco Rubio traveled to see how much progress was being made. The envoy Witkoff was there. They were trying to push. But also remember, there was that deal, the memorandum of intent that was supposed to have been signed when President Zelensky traveled to Washington, and that was not signed in the end when there was that verbal match sledding. So I think the Americans simply want progress. Remember, President Trump, during the course of the election, he did say that he wanted to see the war in Ukraine ending very quickly. So I would take, from my understanding, the Ukrainians, both Kiev and Moscow, are taking this as a pressure point, just an expression of what the Americans would have expected as a way to move things forward. The Kremlin spokesperson Peskov responded and said they want a solution, they want a peace agreement, but did acknowledge that the talks were not easy, and the Ukrainians as well say this is going to take time. Felicity?
What would be the potential implications for global stability and conflict resolution if the U.S. were to withdraw from the peace talks, and what would be alternative approach?
I don't think there's an alternative. The Americans have no choice but to stay on course, because if they leave, then they're just leaving the Russians to take charge, and then it will be worse off for Ukraine, it will be worse off for Europe, because it is not at the moment, although most of Western Europe are members of NATO. If the Americans say that they are walking away, it would be unlikely that the members of NATO in Europe will want to then go into Ukraine without the backing of the Americans. The Americans, run or probably are responsible for over 90% of, the military action that happens within the context of NATO. So, and then the intelligence, sharing, if they are not participating, it's almost impossible. So I don't think that the Americans will walk away, but I think they will continue to use that as a pressure point to try and bring the Ukrainians and the Russians to the table for a quick resolution. But their threats to walk away disadvantage Ukraine and give an advantage to the Russians, because the Russians would want a scenario where the Americans were not involved in the first place, which is not possible in the context of the global politics, the interests that are there. NATO forces are almost everywhere around Ukraine. It's highly unlikely that the Americans would walk away.
Thamsanqa, as always, thank you for obliging us.